long before anyone wrote the words Garden of Eden, before Adam, before Eve, before a single verse of Genesis existed, there was a king in Mesopotamia who refused to accept that death was final. His name was Gilgamesh, and roughly 4,000 years ago someone sat down and carved his story into wet clay with a reed stylus, one wedge-shaped mark at a time. That story would eventually be buried, forgotten, buried again under sand and empire and time itself, and then dug back out of the ruins of Nineveh in the 1800s. Shocking scholars who suddenly realized the Bible wasn't the only ancient book talking about floods, gods, and humanity's desperate hunger for eternal life. Here's the question that keeps popping up online, in comment sections, in half-remembered documentaries. Did Gilgamesh prove that humans were immortal before Eden? Was there some older, forgotten tradition where death itself was the exception, not the rule, and only later did humanity fall into mortality the way Adam and Eve supposedly did? It sounds explosive. It sounds like the kind of thing that would rewrite everything we think we know about the Bible's origins. But here's the thing. The answer isn't a simple yes or no. It depends entirely on separating what the actual clay tablets say from what people online claim they say. And trust me, there's a massive gap between those two things. Because buried inside this epic, there really is a flood. There really is a man who survives it, and is granted something no other mortal has, life without end. There really is a secret about the gods that this survivor reveals to Gilgamesh, a secret humans were never supposed to hear. And there really is a plant, a strange thorny plant at the bottom of a cosmic sea, said to restore youth to whoever eats it. Gilgamesh gets his hands on it, and then, in one of the most devastating moments in ancient literature, he loses it in the span of a single sentence. So tonight, we're going all the way back. Back before Eden, back before the Hebrew Bible existed in any form. Back to the river valleys of ancient Sumer and Babylon, where humans first started writing down their fears about death, their jealousy of the gods, and their desperate theories about why life has to end at all. We'll walk through the clay tablets themselves, not just the internet summaries. We'll meet the real king this story might be based on. We'll follow Gilgamesh across mountains, through the waters of death and into a conversation with the one man who cheated mortality entirely. And we'll ask honestly, carefully, what this 4,000-year-old story is actually claiming, and what it never claimed at all. Before we go further, if you're listening to fall asleep, or just unwind, let me know in the comments where you're tuned in from, and what time it is right there. I love seeing this pop up. London at midnight, Manila at sunrise, all reading the same words at once. And if this kind of deep dive into ancient history helps you relax or drift off, the best way to support what I do is to follow the show on Spotify. Listen there, and if you enjoy it, leave a 5-star review. Links in the description. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Back before the flood. Back before the garden. Back to a king who could not accept that he too would die. Let's start with the material itself, because the story of how Gilgamesh survived is almost as strange as the story he tells. This wasn't written on paper. Paper hadn't been invented yet, and even if it had, paper rots, burns, crumbles into dust within a few centuries. The Mesopotamians wrote on clay, wet, soft, unglamorous clay, the kind you'd find on a riverbank. A scribe would take a reed, cut at an angle, and press it into the surface again and again. Thousands of tiny wedge-shaped impressions, what we now call cuneiform. Then the tablet would dry in the sun or get baked in a kiln, and suddenly you had something almost indestructible. Fire that would destroy a library of scrolls would actually harden a library of clay. Flood, collapse, centuries of abandonment, none of it mattered much. The tablets just sat there, buried under the rubble of collapsed palaces, waiting. And they waited a long time. We're talking about a writing system that was already old when the pyramids were new, a tradition of clay tablet literature that stretched back before 3000 BCE and continued for roughly 3000 years after that. Entire libraries were built this way. Kings collected tablets the way modern collectors chase first editions, except these first editions were literally baked into permanence. One of those kings, an Assyrian ruler named Ashurbanipal, put together what might have been the ancient world's most ambitious library at his capital in Nineveh, sometime around the 7th century BCE. He wanted copies of everything: medical texts, omens, hymns, historical records, and epic poetry. Among the tens of thousands of tablets his scribes gathered and copied was a long, multi-tablet story about a king named Gilgamesh, who refused to accept his own death. Then Nineveh fell. The library burned, the city was sacked, and for roughly 2,500 years, nobody on earth could read a single word of what had been written there. Not because the words were destroyed. In a strange twist, the fire that burned Ashurbanipal's palace actually baked many of the clay tablets even harder, preserving them instead of destroying them. The problem was that the language itself, the ability to read cuneiform script and understand Akkadian, the language it recorded had simply vanished from human memory. The tablets survived, the knowledge of how to read them did not. That changes in the 1800s. European archaeologists, driven by a mix of genuine curiosity and colonial-era competition to fill museum collections, started digging into the mounds of ancient Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. They uncovered palace ruins, temple foundations, and thousands upon thousands of these clay tablets, shipping crate after crate of them back to places like the British Museum. But a tablet full of unreadable wedge marks isn't exactly a thrilling museum piece. It just sits in storage until someone can crack the code. That someone turned out to be a man named George Smith, a self-taught assistant at the British Museum, who had essentially trained himself to read cuneiform by studying the fragments obsessively, piecing together patterns the way you'd solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. In 1872, while working through a batch of these Nineveh tablets, Smith found something that made him, according to the story he later told, leap up and start tearing off his clothes in excitement. He had just translated a passage describing a great flood, a boat, a bird sent out to find dry land. It read like a version of Noah's story, except it was carved into clay centuries, maybe over 1,000 years, before the book of Genesis existed in any form we'd recognize. This discovery landed like a bombshell. Victorian society, deeply invested in the Bible as a unique and singular revelation, suddenly had to reckon with the fact that a flood story, a strikingly similar flood story, had been sitting in the ground of ancient Mesopotamia long before Moses supposedly wrote anything down. And that flood story was only one piece of a much larger poem, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Smith had stumbled onto one of the great literary discoveries in human history practically by accident. Now, here's where the story gets a little more complicated, because Gilgamesh isn't really one single text. It's more like a layered tradition, built up over roughly 1,000 years. The version George Smith found in Ashurbanipal's library is what scholars call the Standard Babylonian version, a relatively polished, unified telling, compiled sometime around 1200 to 1000 BCE by a scribe traditionally identified as Sin-Leki-Unini. But that version wasn't invented from nothing. It drew on older, separate Sumerian poems about Gilgamesh, shorter stories, some of them centuries older, that circulated independently before anyone stitched them into one continuous epic. These Sumerian tales, with titles like Gilgamesh and the Bull of Heaven or Gilgamesh, Enkidu, and the Netherworld, go back potentially as far as 2100 BCE, and they don't always agree with each other. Details shift. Enkidu's role changes. The tone varies from tablet to tablet. It's less like a single novel and more like centuries of storytellers reworking the same beloved character, the way different cultures reshape a legend over generations. This creates a genuinely tricky question for historians. When people call Gilgamesh the oldest story in the world, what they usually mean is that its roots reach back further than almost anything else we can read. But the actual physical tablets we possess, the ones sitting in museum cases today, are mostly copies made long after the earliest oral or written versions would have existed. We're not holding the original. We're holding a copy of a tradition that had already been retold for centuries before it was carved into the form we now study. That doesn't make it any less remarkable. If anything, it makes it more remarkable because it means this story about death, meaning, and the desperate wish to escape mortality mattered enough to entire civilizations that they kept recopying it, generation after generation, for well over 1,000 years. So before we can talk about what Gilgamesh actually says about immortality, we need to understand who this king supposedly was in the first place, and whether he was ever a real flesh and blood ruler at all. So was Gilgamesh ever real? Was there actually a king walking the streets of Uruk, giving orders from a palace, leading soldiers into battle, and becoming so famous that people were still telling stories about him 1,000 years later? The honest answer is, probably. But we can't prove it the way we could prove the existence of a later king with inscriptions, monuments, and archives stamped with his name. Gilgamesh stands at the foggy edge of history, in that dangerous zone where real people, royal propaganda, religious belief, and centuries of storytelling all start blending together until separating them becomes almost impossible. According to the Sumerian king list, a document that names rulers who supposedly governed Mesopotamia from the beginning of kingship onward, Gilgamesh was one of the early kings of Uruk. He appears as the 5th ruler of Uruk's first dynasty, after a king named Dumuzi, and he is credited with ruling for 126 years. Which should immediately make us cautious. A 126-year reign is not a historical record in the modern sense. It's the kind of number you get when a culture is remembering a king as larger than life. But notice something important. The king list doesn't place Gilgamesh before the flood, among the impossible rulers said to have reigned for tens of thousands of years. It puts him after the flood in the human world. He is not presented as some god who descended from heaven yesterday. He belongs to an early dynasty, connected to a real city, a real political landscape, and what may be a real period of conflict between the first city-states of southern Mesopotamia. That matters because Uruk was not an invented fantasy kingdom. It was one of the first great cities on Earth. By roughly 3200 BCE, Uruk had grown into a massive urban centre by ancient standards, perhaps home to tens of thousands of people. It had temples, workshops, administrative buildings, walls, canals, farmers bringing grain in from the countryside, scribes tracking goods on clay tablets, and elites competing for power in a world where cities were becoming more powerful than villages had ever been. This was civilization in its rawest, most experimental form. Not an empire yet, not a nation, a city surrounded by fields, rivals, and uncertainty. And in that world, a successful ruler could become unforgettable. Maybe there really was a king named Gilgamesh, or Bilgames as his name appears in Sumerian, who ruled Uruk sometime in the early dynastic period, perhaps around 2700 BCE. Maybe he led Uruk in wars against neighbouring cities. Maybe he helped build or restore its famous walls. Maybe he became remembered because his reign marked a moment when Uruk was powerful enough to dominate its neighbours. Or maybe the historical core was smaller than that. A local ruler, a military leader, a king whose name survived because later generations attached their hopes and fears to him. We don't have a contemporary inscription that says Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, was here with a date we can verify. Archaeology has not handed us a royal tomb with his name on it. The evidence is frustratingly thin. But thin evidence is not no evidence. Gilgamesh appears not only in the king list, but in several independent Mesopotamian traditions. Later rulers invoked him, priests treated him as a powerful figure of the underworld. His name endured in texts long before the final Epic of Gilgamesh was assembled. That doesn't prove every detail in the poem happened. It does suggest that Mesopotamians themselves remembered him as more than a fictional character. Think about what happens to famous people even now. Take a real leader, warrior, outlaw, or revolutionary. Give people 500 years to tell stories about them. Let each generation add the version that speaks to its own fears. Soon, the person is no longer just a person. They become a container for everything the culture wants to say about courage, power, justice, betrayal, or death. King Arthur may have had some historical inspiration. Robin Hood may preserve fragments of real medieval outlaws. The Greek-Trojan War may reflect memories of real conflicts around a real city. But the stories we know are not courtroom testimony. They are cultural memory. They preserve something true, perhaps, but not always in the way a historian would mean true. Gilgamesh may be the oldest and most extreme example of this process. Imagine the chain. A king dies. His people remember that he was strong, ambitious, maybe brutal, maybe victorious. His name gets repeated in songs and ceremonies. A few generations later, nobody remembers exactly what battle he fought or which wall he built, but they remember that he was extraordinary. Then priests connect him to gods, poets give him a divine mother. Storytellers send him into forests where monsters guard sacred trees. By the time scribes write down the tales, the historical king has become something much stranger, a hero who is not fully human, but not fully divine either, and the epic announces that status right away. Gilgamesh is described as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. Now, that is not mathematics. Nobody in ancient Uruk was calculating divine ancestry with a family tree chart. The phrase tells us what kind of being Gilgamesh is supposed to be. He is above ordinary men, stronger, more beautiful, more terrifying, more capable. In the poem, the gods themselves have shaped him. His mother is Ninsun, a goddess associated with wisdom and interpretation. His father is traditionally identified with Lugalbanda, an earlier king of Uruk, who had also been absorbed into the world of the divine. So Gilgamesh is royal in the deepest possible Mesopotamian sense. His bloodline reaches upward into heaven and backward into the foundations of the city itself. But here's the crucial thing. 2/3 divine does not mean immortal. That is the trap at the heart of the story. Gilgamesh looks like the kind of person who should be able to escape death. He has divine ancestry. He has physical strength no ordinary person can match. He rules the greatest city of his age. His name will outlive entire kingdoms. If anyone deserves an exception, surely it is him. But the Epic of Gilgamesh is built around the horrifying discovery that none of this is enough. The gods may have made him magnificent, but they did not give him eternal life. He begins the story alive, powerful, and almost godlike. He does not begin immortal. In fact, his human third is not some tiny, irrelevant fraction. It is the part that determines everything. It is the part that can suffer, the part that can grieve, the part that will one day die. And perhaps that is why a historical king, if there was one, became the perfect hero for this story. A king is already halfway between worlds. He stands above ordinary people, claiming a special relationship with the gods. Yet he still gets sick, grows old, loses friends, and is buried. He is powerful enough to imagine defeating death, but human enough to fail. Gilgamesh was not remembered because he escaped mortality. He was remembered because he fought it with everything he had. And before he can begin that fight, before death becomes the question that tears his life apart we need to enter the city that made him. Uruk, a place of towering temples, sacred power, brutal kingship, and a civilization trying to understand what separates gods from mortals in the first place. To enter Uruk is to enter a world where the boundary between heaven and earth was never imagined as clean or distant. The gods were not abstract ideas floating somewhere beyond the stars. They had homes, they owned land, they received food, clothing, music, labour, and obedience. Their presence stood over the city in the form of enormous temple complexes, rising above the crowded houses and narrow streets like mountains made by human hands. Uruk was one of the great cities of southern Mesopotamia, built in the fertile but dangerous land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Fertile because those rivers could make grain grow in astonishing quantities. Dangerous because they could also flood at the wrong time, shift their channels, destroy fields, and leave communities facing hunger. A city could prosper for generations, then suffer because rain failed in distant mountains or a canal filled with silt. This was not a world where people expected life to be stable. Every harvest depended on forces no farmer could control. Every city depended on canals that had to be dug, repaired, guarded, and managed. Every family understood that disease, childbirth, war, drought, debt, or a bad season could overturn a life with terrifying speed. One year you had grain in storage, the next your animals were dead, your land was pledged to a creditor, and your sons were marching with the king. And above all of it stood the gods. Uruk was especially associated with Inanna, later known to the Akkadians as Ishtar. She was a goddess of love, sex, fertility, war, political power, and dangerous unpredictability. That is a strange combination to modern ears, but it made sense in Mesopotamia. Love can overwhelm reason. Desire can create life or destroy families. War can bring glory, wealth, and kingship, while leaving fields full of bodies. Inanna was not gentle because the world was not gentle. Her great sacred precinct in Uruk was called the Eanna, the House of Heaven. Nearby stood another major religious centre associated with Anu, the sky god. These were not simply places where people went for private spiritual comfort. They were economic and political institutions at the centre of city life. Temples owned fields, received livestock, employed labourers, stored grain, managed workshops, and organised offerings. Priests and administrators kept records on clay tablets, because divine households, like royal households, required accounting. How much barley came in? How many sheep were delivered? Which workers received rations? What offerings had been prepared for the festival? To us, that might sound almost bureaucratic, but for the people of Uruk, it was sacred. Maintaining the temple was part of maintaining the order of the universe. The gods had made the world. The gods sent rain, drought, victory, plague, and flood. Human beings survived by doing their part, cultivating the land, feeding the divine statues, observing rituals, honouring oaths, and keeping the city functioning. In several Mesopotamian creation traditions, humans are even created specifically to take over the work of the gods. The divine beings are tired of labouring, so humanity is made to carry the burden. That does not mean every person in Mesopotamia spent every waking moment thinking, "I exist only to serve the gods." Real people worried about bread, family arguments, taxes, sick children, livestock, and whether their roof would collapse in the rain. But the larger religious picture was clear. Humans were dependent beings. They were not masters of creation. They lived because the gods allowed life to continue. And kings occupied an uncomfortable position inside that system. A king was not merely a politician. He was expected to protect the city, lead armies, administer justice, build walls, repair canals, sponsor temples, and make sure the gods received what they were owed. If the city was prosperous, that could be seen as evidence of divine favour. If enemies broke through the gates or the harvest failed, people might wonder whether the gods had turned away. So a king stood closer to the gods than ordinary people did. He could claim divine ancestry, he could receive divine support. In later Mesopotamian traditions, rulers were sometimes even treated as divine themselves. But kings were also painfully mortal. They could be defeated. They could fall ill. They could be assassinated. They could watch their sons die before them. And eventually, no matter how many enemies they conquered or temples they restored, they went into the ground. That is the tension at the centre of Gilgamesh. He rules a city built around immortal powers. He walks beneath temples dedicated to beings who do not age, who do not weaken, who do not lie awake fearing that this may be their final night. The gods can be wounded, angered, deceived, even temporarily threatened in Mesopotamian stories. But they do not face death the way humans do. Their lives belong to a different category. Mortals, meanwhile, live at the mercy of time. They can gain wealth and lose it. They can become kings and become dust. Their fortunes rise and fall so quickly that Mesopotamian literature often treats human life as fundamentally unstable. A person may be healthy in the morning and dead by evening. A powerful household may collapse in a generation. A city may stand behind great walls for centuries and still be abandoned when war, climate, or changing rivers make survival impossible. Imagine what that did to the human mind. You can build a city larger than anything your ancestors ever knew. You can raise walls around it. You can organize thousands of workers, send merchants across deserts, write names into clay so they will endure beyond a single lifetime. And yet every person who makes that possible is still temporary. The walls remain, the temple remains, the tablets remain. But the hands that built them vanish. For Mesopotamians, death was not usually imagined as a doorway into a perfect reward. The underworld was often pictured as a dim and dusty place beneath the earth, a land where the dead continued in reduced, shadowy form. Proper burial and offerings mattered. Family members were expected to care for the dead through rituals. But the ordinary fate of humanity was not eternal joy. It was endurance for a while, then darkness. That is why immortality was such a radical idea. Not because nobody had ever dreamed of living longer. Humans have always dreamed that, but because Mesopotamian culture placed immortality firmly on the other side of a cosmic border. The gods possessed it, humans did not. There were rare exceptions in myth. Figures who crossed the boundary through divine favour, impossible tests or events, so extraordinary that normal rules no longer applied. But an exception only proves how strong the rule is. If a mortal becomes immortal, the story has to explain why. Something enormous must have happened, and Gilgamesh is about to discover that this boundary does not care who he is. At the beginning, he has almost everything a man could want. Strength, beauty, royal power, divine blood, a city that speaks his name. But he does not yet understand the one thing that makes all of those gifts unstable. He is still human. Uruk gives him power. The gods give him stature, but neither gives him control over death. And before that truth breaks him open, Gilgamesh first has to learn something else. What happens when a king with no equal becomes so powerful that even his own people begin asking the gods for rescue? The people of Uruk had asked for rescue, not from famine, not from an invading army, not from some demon sent by the gods. They asked to be rescued from their king. Gilgamesh was magnificent. The poem never lets us forget that. He was powerful beyond ordinary men, beautiful, terrifying, and 2/3 divine according to the epic's famous opening description. He had built great walls. he would become the hero whose name survived thousands of years in clay. But at the beginning of the story, he is not wise. He is not compassionate. He is a young ruler with no limit placed on his strength, and that makes him dangerous. The people say Gilgamesh does not leave a son to his father. He takes the young men of Uruk for his own projects, his battles, his demands. The city belongs to him, and so, it seems, do the bodies and labour of everyone inside it. The poem also describes him claiming access to brides before their husbands. Exactly what this refers to has been debated. Some scholars see a royal or ritual prerogative. Others read it as straightforward sexual abuse. But the central point is not really in doubt. Gilgamesh violates the people he is supposed to protect. This is the nightmare hidden inside kingship. A king is meant to be the shepherd of his people. He is supposed to defend widows, uphold justice, maintain canals, protect the weak from the strong. But what happens when the strongest man in the kingdom is the one nobody can appeal against? Who judges the judge? Uruk has walls, temples, priests, elders, families, workshops, markets, and laws. But Gilgamesh stands above all of them. He is too strong for any challenger, too royal for ordinary punishment, too close to the gods for his people to imagine removing him themselves. So they do the only thing they can do. They cry out to heaven. The gods hear Uruk's complaint, and their response is fascinating. They do not strike Gilgamesh dead. They do not send plague into the palace. They do not take his throne away. They create someone who can meet him face to face. The goddess Aruru, who in the story has a role in shaping humanity itself, takes clay in her hands. This matters. In Mesopotamian tradition, humans are often made from earth mixed with divine substance. People are not dropped from heaven fully formed. They are shaped from the same ground they farm, build with, and eventually return to in death. Aruru throws the clay into the wilderness, and from it comes Enkidu. Not a prince, not a soldier from a rival city, not a god descending in glory. A wild man. Enkidu is covered in hair. His body is powerful. He knows no city, no palace, no laws, no bread, no beer, no clothing. He lives on the steppe among gazelles and wild animals. He eats grass with them. He drinks from watering holes with them. When hunters set traps, Enkidu tears them apart. When they dig pits to catch animals, he fills them in. To the animals, he is one of their own. And to Uruk, he is exactly what Gilgamesh needs. Think about the contrast. Gilgamesh's civilization pushed too far. Walls, authority, ambition, power, hierarchy. Enkidu is the world before all of that. Open land, animal life, physical strength without kingship. He has no crown, no servants, no city to dominate. The gods do not create a second Gilgamesh. They create his opposite. At first, Enkidu does not even know why he exists. He simply lives. He runs with the animals, protects them from hunters, and knows the rhythms of the wild. But a trapper sees him and is horrified. Imagine spending days preparing a pit, arranging a snare, tracking the movement of game, only to find that some enormous naked man has undone all your work. The trapper goes to his father. His father tells him to go to Uruk, and in Uruk the solution is not a weapon. It is Shamhat. Shamhat is often called a temple prostitute in older translations, though her exact social role is more complicated than that label suggests. She is a woman connected to sacred and urban life, someone who understands the human world Enkidu has never entered. She goes out to the watering place and waits. Then Enkidu comes with the animals. What happens next is one of the strangest and most important transformations in ancient literature. Shamhat reveals herself to Enkidu. She invites him toward her, and for 6 days and 7 nights Enkidu lies with her. Modern readers sometimes expect this episode to be treated as a simple seduction story. But in the epic, it is much bigger than that. This is the moment Enkidu crosses a boundary. When he returns to the animals, they flee from him. He tries to run after them, but his body is no longer the same. The poem says his knees weaken, his strength has changed. Not necessarily vanished, but changed. He has gained awareness, desire, and a new kind of understanding. He is no longer fully at home in the animal world. And Shamhat tells him something crucial. You are wise, Enkidu. You have become like a god. That line is not saying Enkidu has become immortal. He has not. In fact, the story will eventually make his mortality brutally clear. But he has entered the world of human consciousness. He can reflect. He can desire things beyond food and shelter. He can understand social life, reputation, friendship, fear, and loss. Civilization begins with separation. Separation from the animals. Separation from instinct. Separation from the simple rhythm of drinking, eating, mating, sleeping, and surviving. But civilization also gives Enkidu gifts. Shamhat brings him to shepherds. They offer him bread, and he does not know what it is. They offer him beer, and he does not know how to drink it. The scene is almost comic at first. Enkidu, the great wild man who can overpower hunters, has to be taught how to eat like a human being. He eats bread until he is satisfied. He drinks beer, 7 cups in some versions, and his heart becomes light. He sings. He is joyful. Then he is washed. Oil is rubbed onto his body. He puts on clothing. These details are not random. Bread means agriculture. Beer means stored grain, fermentation. Skilled labour, communal feasting. Clothing means modesty, identity, status, and life beyond the raw exposure of the wilderness. Oil, grooming, and garments mean Enkidu is being remade for human society. He also learns language more deeply, conversation, names, news. He hears about Uruk. He hears about Gilgamesh. And he hears what Gilgamesh has been doing to the people. That is when the wild man finds his purpose. Enkidu does not go to Uruk because he wants a throne. He goes because someone must stop the king. He becomes a protector almost immediately. When he hears that Gilgamesh intends to enter a wedding house and claim his privilege over a bride, Enkidu places himself in the doorway. And then the two forces collide. Gilgamesh arrives. Enkidu blocks his path. No speeches, no army, no divine lightning. Just 2 men. They grapple in the street or at the gate, depending on the version and translation. The doorposts shake. The walls tremble. Uruk watches as the king, who has never met resistance, finally encounters someone he cannot simply command. For the first time, Gilgamesh has an equal. The fight is violent, but it does not end with one man killing the other. Gilgamesh eventually proves stronger, or perhaps simply gains the advantage. Yet Enkidu has done what nobody else could do. He has stood against him. He has forced Gilgamesh to recognize another will as powerful as his own. And something unexpected happens. They become friends, not polite allies. Not political partners keeping one another at a safe distance. The epic describes a bond so deep that the two become almost inseparable. Enkidu becomes Gilgamesh's brother in everything but blood. The king who treated his people as objects discovers companionship. The wild man who lost the animals gains a human connection stronger than anything he has known. This is the first great change in Gilgamesh. He is still proud, still hungry for fame, still drawn toward danger, but Enkidu gives him a boundary, a witness, and someone who can tell him no. He gives him the one thing power had denied him, an equal. and that friendship will make Gilgamesh greater than he was. It will also make him vulnerable in a way no enemy ever could. Friendship changes Gilgamesh, but it does not make him humble. If anything, it gives his ambition a new direction. Gilgamesh looks at Enkidu, this man shaped from clay, raised among animals, strong enough to challenge a king, and he sees the perfect companion for an impossible deed. Somewhere far from Uruk, beyond the settled fields and the familiar roads, lies the Cedar Forest. To Mesopotamians, cedar was not just another kind of tree. Southern Mesopotamia had mud, reeds, river clay, and date palms, but it did not have vast forests of towering timber. Cedar came from distant mountain lands, probably associated in the epic with the forests of Lebanon or the Amanus range. It was rare, expensive, fragrant, fit for temples, palaces, ships, doors, and the houses of gods. The cedar forest was wealth at the edge of the known world, and it was guarded by Humbaba, or Huwawa in some older Sumerian versions of the story. His name changes slightly across languages and tablets, but his role remains the same. He is the terrifying guardian of the forest, appointed by the great god Enlil himself. The descriptions of Humbaba are deliberately unsettling. His face is compared to the strange coils and ripples of animal entrails. His roar is like a flood. His mouth is fire. His breath is death. Later artists sometimes pictured him as a giant with a grotesque mask-like face, part human and part monstrous. But Humbaba is not simply a random beast waiting for heroes to kill him. He is a guardian. Enlil placed him there to protect the cedar trees from human greed. That detail matters because Gilgamesh and Enkidu are not marching into the forest to save innocent people. They are going to invade a sacred boundary, cut down its trees, and kill the being appointed to defend it. And Gilgamesh knows the danger. Enkidu knows it even better. Before Enkidu came to Uruk, he had lived near the wilderness. In some versions, he tells Gilgamesh that he has seen Humbaba before, that the guardian's strength is overwhelming, that the forest itself is filled with dread. The trees are so dense, their shadows so deep that even entering the place feels like entering another world. Enkidu is afraid. Gilgamesh is afraid too, though at first he covers it with speeches about glory. This is one of the first moments where the epic lets us see what drives him. Gilgamesh does not say, "I will go because it is wise." He does not say, "I will go because Uruk needs cedar." He says, in effect, that human beings are doomed to die anyway. So why not do something great before death comes? If I fall, Gilgamesh reasons, I will have established my name. That is the logic of fame. And it is ancient, maybe as ancient as kingship itself. A human life is short, a body weakens. Even the strongest man can be wounded, grow old, vanish. But a name can outlive the body. A king can die, but his walls may remain. A warrior can be buried, but songs may continue to carry his story. Gilgamesh has not yet become obsessed with escaping death itself. That comes later, after grief tears his world apart. For now he tries a different answer. If I cannot live forever, I will be remembered forever. It sounds noble, it sounds brave, it is also dangerous. The elders of Uruk try to warn him. They tell him that Humbaba is not an ordinary enemy. Enkidu, despite his own fear, agrees to go, and Gilgamesh's mother, the goddess Ninsun, prays to Shamash, the sun god, asking him to protect her son on the journey. Then the two friends set out. The trip to the Cedar Forest is not just a walk into the woods. It is an expedition beyond civilization. They travel enormous distances in a few days, at least in the epic's compressed heroic time. Each night Gilgamesh performs rituals and sleeps. Each night he has a dream, And each dream is frightening. A mountain collapses on him. A wild bull charges. Thunder shakes the earth. Fire falls from the sky. Gilgamesh wakes in terror. Enkidu interprets the dreams as good omens. The falling mountain means Humbaba will fall. The bull means Shamash will aid them. The fire means divine power is on their side. Maybe Enkidu truly believes this. Maybe he is trying to keep Gilgamesh moving. Either way, the dreams tell us something important. The heroes are not invincible. They are crossing into a place where even Gilgamesh, 2/3 divine, wakes shaking in the dark. At last they reach the forest. The epic pauses over its beauty. The cedars rise high. Their shade is deep. Resin drips from the trees. Birds call in the branches. The forest is magnificent, alive and protected. Then Humbaba appears. The confrontation does not begin with easy confidence. Gilgamesh is terrified. Enkidu urges him forward. They remind each other why they came. Friendship becomes courage shared between two frightened people. And when the battle begins, they do not win by strength alone. Shamash intervenes. The sun god sends powerful winds against Humbaba. The winds strike from every direction, trapping the guardian, blinding him, preventing him from escaping into the depths of the forest. Humbaba is brought down not simply by two heroic men, but by divine assistance. Then comes the moment that changes everything. Humbaba begs for his life. He offers Gilgamesh the forest. He offers cedar. He promises service. In some versions he tries flattery, calling Gilgamesh a great king and promising to become his servant. For a moment, Gilgamesh hesitates. That hesitation is crucial. He can see that the guardian is beaten. He does not have to kill him. But Enkidu urges him to act. Do not listen, he warns. Kill Humbaba before Enlil learns what has happened. And together, the friends kill the guardian of the cedar forest. They cut down the cedars. They take the great trees. They make a massive gate for Enlil's temple at Nippur, an offering built from the very forest Enlil had placed Humbaba there to guard. So was this a heroic victory? The epic certainly gives it the force of one. Gilgamesh and Enkidu have faced the impossible. They have gone beyond the safe world of Uruk, confronted terror, and returned with a deed no ordinary men could accomplish. Their names will be remembered, but the poem also leaves a stain on the victory. Humbaba was not attacking Uruk. He was guarding a place entrusted to him by a god. The heroes kill a defeated enemy who begs for mercy. They take what they came to take. They turn divine protection into human conquest. This is glory, but it is glory with a cost. Gilgamesh believes he has found an answer to mortality. Death may take his body one day, but his fame will stand like cedar wood, tall and enduring. He does not yet understand that fame can preserve a name. It cannot protect the people you love, but the consequences do not wait quietly in the distance. They arrive in Uruk. Gilgamesh and Enkidu return from the cedar forest carrying fame, cedar, and the terrible knowledge of what they have done. The city celebrates. Gilgamesh washes the dust of the journey from his body. He puts on royal robes, he fastens his weapons, he stands in the radiance of victory, and Ishtar sees him. Ishtar is one of the most powerful gods in Mesopotamia. She is the goddess of love, sex, fertility, and political power. But she is also the goddess of war. She can bring desire, but she can also bring ruin. In Akkadian she is Ishtar. In Sumerian she is Inanna. Different names, closely connected divine traditions, and both point toward a force Mesopotamians understood as overwhelming, beautiful, dangerous, and impossible to control. She looks at Gilgamesh, the victorious king, and makes him an offer. Be my lover. It is not a small invitation. If Gilgamesh accepts, Ishtar promises him extraordinary things. A chariot of gold and lapis lazuli, kings and princes bowing before him. Wealth, power, victory over his enemies. A divine marriage that could raise his status beyond anything a mortal king could normally imagine. For many ancient rulers, this would have been the ultimate prize. Gilgamesh says no, not privately, not gently, not with the careful diplomacy you might expect from a king speaking to a goddess. He rejects her openly, and then he insults her. Gilgamesh begins listing Ishtar's former lovers, one after another, and asks what happened to them after they received her affection. The answer is always the same: disaster. There is Tammuz, the shepherd god associated with fertility and seasonal death. There is a brightly coloured bird she loved, only to break its wing. There is a lion she loved, then trapped and destroyed. A horse she desired, then cursed with exhaustion, whips and tears. There is even a gardener named Ishalanu, who rejects her advances and is transformed into a creature that cannot escape her punishment. The details vary in interpretation, and some references are obscure to us now. These stories were already ancient when the standard Babylonian version of Gilgamesh was written down. But Gilgamesh's meaning is perfectly clear. Why would any man become Ishtar's lover when her lovers do not survive her love? It is an extraordinary scene, because Gilgamesh is doing something almost unthinkable. He is not merely refusing a goddess, he is challenging her character in public. He calls her unreliable, destructive, dangerous to those closest to her, and he is not entirely wrong. But being right does not make the insult safe. Ishtar goes to her father, Anu, the sky god. Furious and humiliated, she demands the bull of heaven. The bull of heaven is not just a large animal sent to punish a king. It is a divine weapon, a cosmic force. In Mesopotamian imagination, bulls could represent terrifying strength, kingship, storms, and the destructive force of heaven itself. Some scholars connect the bull with a constellation, perhaps Taurus, though the epic's immediate concern is not astronomy. It is catastrophe. Anu hesitates. He warns Ishtar that releasing the bull will bring famine to Uruk. The earth will crack, crops will fail, people will die. Ishtar insists. In some versions, she claims she has stored enough grain to feed the city through years of disaster. Whether that assurance is meant to calm Anu or pressure him, it changes nothing. The bull comes down, and Uruk begins to break. With its first snort, the ground opens. Great fissures split the earth, men fall into them. With another blast, more people disappear. The poem gives numbers in huge heroic scale, hundreds at a time swallowed by the ruptured ground. It is probably not asking us to calculate casualties like a modern disaster report. It is showing divine punishment as something beyond normal human strength. The city that Gilgamesh rules, the city of walls and temples and crowded streets, is suddenly helpless beneath heaven's anger. Then Gilgamesh and Enkidu step forward. They do not run. Enkidu understands the bull's danger. He grabs it by the tail. Gilgamesh moves in with his weapon and strikes. Together, the two friends kill the bull of heaven. Once again, they have defeated something no human being should be able to defeat. Once again, their victory comes with a violation of divine order. And then Enkidu makes everything worse. He tears off part of the bull's body and throws it at Ishtar. In the standard version, he hurls its haunch at her and taunts her. If she had come close enough, he says, he would have treated her the same way. It is a shocking insult. Gilgamesh rejected Ishtar with words. Enkidu answers her with violence and mockery. The goddess mourns. The women associated with her cult mourn with her. Meanwhile, Gilgamesh and Enkidu celebrate their triumph. They display the bull's horns, they dedicate them as trophies. That night, Enkidu has a dream, and this dream is different from the dreams on the road to the Cedar Forest. There is no comforting interpretation waiting in the dream. The gods hold an assembly. Anu, Enlil, Ea, Shamash, and the great powers of heaven consider what Gilgamesh and Enkidu have done. They killed Humbaba, guardian of Enlil's sacred forest. They killed the bull of heaven, sent by Ishtar. They have crossed boundaries again and again, and this time the gods decide there must be a price. One of the two heroes must die. Shamash argues for them. He had helped them defeat Humbaba. He reminds the assembly that they acted with his support. But divine politics are not simple justice. The decision has already taken shape. Gilgamesh will live, Enkidu will die, and suddenly all the glory of the Cedar Forest, all the cheers of Uruk, all the strength that let two friends strike down a monster and a god's bull begins to look fragile, because the gods have made their choice, and no weapon Gilgamesh carries can cut his friend free. The sentence comes true almost immediately. Enkidu wakes sick, not wounded from battle, not bleeding from a spear, not dying in the kind of heroic death a warrior might expect after facing Humbaba and the bull of heaven. He is simply struck down. His body weakens. He lies in bed. Day after day, the man who ran with wild animals, who wrestled Gilgamesh to a standstill, who seized the bull of heaven by the tail, can no longer rise. And Enkidu knows what this means. The gods have chosen him. At first, he is furious, not only at the gods, but at the human beings who brought him into this world of cities, kings, glory, and death. Before Shamhat found him, Enkidu lived among the animals. He drank at the watering holes. He knew no palace, no fame, no divine punishment. Now he lies dying because he became Gilgamesh's friend. So he curses. He curses the trapper who first saw him at the watering hole and feared him. The trapper had gone to Gilgamesh for help. Gilgamesh had sent Shamhat, the woman from the temple, to meet Enkidu and draw him away from the wild. Without them, Enkidu thinks, none of this would have happened. He would not have entered Uruk. He would not have challenged Gilgamesh. He would not have gone to the Cedar Forest. He would not have killed Humbaba. He would not have insulted Ishtar, and he would not now be waiting for death. Then Enkidu turns on Shamhat. His curse is brutal. He wishes her abandonment, poverty, humiliation. He imagines her standing outside the city, unwanted and alone. It is the rage of a dying man searching for someone to blame. If Shamhat had not transformed him from a creature of the wild into a human being inside society, perhaps he would have escaped this fate. But Shamash intervenes. The sun god reminds Enkidu of what Shamhat actually gave him. Yes, she led him away from the animals, but she also gave him food, clothing, knowledge, companionship. Through her, Enkidu met Gilgamesh. Through Gilgamesh, he gained friendship, honour, and a name that would outlast his body. And Enkidu changes. This reversal matters. He does not suddenly stop being afraid. He does not discover that death is acceptable, but he recognizes that the life he is losing was real. It contained joy. It contained loyalty. It contained something he never had among the animals. So Enkidu withdraws his curse. He blesses Shamhat instead. He wishes her prosperity. He wishes that powerful men will desire her, that gifts and fine things will come into her hands. In the space between curse and blessing, the epic gives us something painfully human. Enkidu is not only mourning his own death, he is mourning the life he had learned to love. Then his dreams grow darker. In one of them, a terrifying being grips him. It has the face of a strange bird, the claws of an eagle, and the touch of death. It drags him down into the earth, toward the place Mesopotamians imagined as the House of Dust. The underworld is not a paradise. It is not a place where the righteous rise into endless light. It is a vast, dim realm beneath the ground, where the dead eat dust and clay, where kings and servants, priests and warriors, all wear feathers like birds. Enkidu sees former rulers there. Men who once wore crowns now sit in darkness. Great officials, priests and warriors exist as shadows. Death does not care who held power in Uruk. It does not care who killed monsters. It does not care who received the favour of a god. The grave takes everyone. For Gilgamesh, this is horrifying. He has faced physical threats before. Humbaba could be killed. The bull of heaven could be killed. But Enkidu's sickness cannot be fought. There is no enemy to strike, no forest to cross, no weapon strong enough to force the gods to change their decree. For 12 days, depending on the version and translation, Enkidu lies dying. Gilgamesh remains beside him. Imagine what that means for the king of Uruk. The man introduced to us as powerful, restless, almost unbearable in his strength. The man who believed glory could make his name permanent. Now all his strength has been reduced to watching. Watching his equal disappear, Enkidu finally dies, and Gilgamesh breaks. He tears at his hair, he throws off his royal clothing. He roams in grief. He cries out for his friend over and over again. The language of the lament is raw. Gilgamesh calls Enkidu his brother, his companion, his beloved friend. He compares him to an axe at his side, a shield before him, a weapon he could trust. But Enkidu was more than an object of strength. He was the one person who had seen Gilgamesh as an equal. Without Enkidu, the king is alone again. Gilgamesh orders a funeral of enormous scale. He has craftsmen make a statue or image of Enkidu. He gathers treasures, gold, lapis lazuli, precious objects. He calls the people of Uruk to mourn. The ritual gives Enkidu honour, but it cannot give him back. Then comes the detail that changes everything. Gilgamesh does not immediately leave the body. He stays with it. In the standard Babylonian epic, he keeps vigil until he sees a worm fall from Enkidu's nose. Other translations render the image slightly differently, but the point is unmistakable. The beautiful, strong body of his friend is beginning to decay. This is the moment Gilgamesh cannot escape. Not death as an idea. Not a distant warning from priests or gods, not the heroic possibility of dying in battle. This, the corpse of the man he loved becoming something else. Gilgamesh looks at Enkidu and sees his own future. If Enkidu can die, then Gilgamesh can die. If Enkidu's strength ends in dust, then what will happen to the king of Uruk? His walls may endure, his name may be remembered, but his body will fail. His breath will stop, his face will become unrecognizable. And suddenly fame is not enough. Until now, Gilgamesh wanted glory. He wanted to do deeds no one could forget. But after Enkidu's death, he wants something more impossible. He wants not to die. He begins asking the question that drives the rest of the epic, the question beneath every road he is about to travel. Must Gilgamesh die too? Gilgamesh does not stay in Uruk and wait for an answer. He leaves. Think about what that means. He is not just a grieving friend walking beyond the city walls for a few days. He is the king of Uruk. He has a palace, servants, guards, food stores, temples, walls that rise like mountains over the plain. Everything civilization can offer is behind him, and he walks away from it. The tablets describe him roaming the wilderness dressed in animal skins. The king, who once wore royal garments, now looks like a man stripped back to something older and more desperate. He crosses open country. He sleeps in the wild, he hunts, and eats what he can find. He is no longer Gilgamesh the builder, Gilgamesh the conqueror. Gilgamesh whose name echoes through Uruk. He is Gilgamesh, the frightened mortal, and everywhere he goes the same thought follows him. I am afraid of death. That confession is one of the most startling things in the epic. Ancient kings were supposed to project strength. Their inscriptions celebrate victories, construction projects, divine favour. They do not usually admit terror, but Gilgamesh does. He has seen Enkidu become a corpse. He has seen the worm. Now every road leads in his mind toward the underworld. But Gilgamesh has heard of one possible exception. Far beyond the ordinary world lives Utnapishtim, the distant ancestor who survived a great flood and received something no ordinary human being possesses, life without end. Not a long reign, not a famous name, not descendants who remember him. Immortality. Gilgamesh decides he must find him. This is where the story changes shape. Until now, the epic has been a tale of a king and his companion confronting monsters at the edges of civilization. The Cedar Forest was dangerous, but it was still a place Gilgamesh entered as a hero seeking glory. Now he travels for a completely different reason. He is not seeking a monster to defeat. He is seeking a way out of being human. His road takes him toward Mashu, the great mountain at the edge of the world. In Mesopotamian imagination, Mashu is not merely a mountain range on a map. It is a boundary. Its peaks hold up the heavens. Its roots reach down into the underworld. The sun itself passes through it, entering one side at evening and emerging from the other at dawn. To reach Utnapishtim, Gilgamesh must go where even the sun travels. At the gate of Mashu stand its guardians, the scorpion beings. They are terrifying. Their appearance combines human and scorpion features, and the epic describes them in cosmic terms. The terror of their gaze is death. Their radiance is overwhelming. Their heads seem to reach the sky, while their fearsome presence guards the passage no ordinary traveller should attempt. Gilgamesh has fought Humbaba. He has faced the bull of heaven. But when he sees the scorpion guardians, even he is shaken. One of them looks at him and recognizes something strange. Gilgamesh is not entirely like other men. The epic repeatedly calls him 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. That divine ancestry is real enough to make the guardians pause. Yet it does not make him immortal. It does not protect Enkidu. It does not free Gilgamesh from fear. The Scorpion Man asks why he has come so far, dressed in skins, exhausted and grieving. Gilgamesh answers with the truth. He is searching for Utnapishtim. He wants to ask the one man who escaped death how he did it. The Guardian warns him that the route ahead is almost impossible. Beyond the gate is a tunnel through the heart of Mashu. No human being normally travels there. It is the road of the sun, a path of total darkness where there is no light to guide the eye. No landmark, no way to know whether you're moving toward life or deeper into death. But Gilgamesh will not turn back. That is important. His courage has changed. Before, courage meant charging into the cedar forest with an axe in his hand. Now courage means continuing when there is nothing to fight, nothing to conquer, and no promise that the journey will succeed. The Scorpion Guardians allow him to pass, and Gilgamesh enters the mountain. For 12 double hours, according to the poem's timekeeping, he moves through absolute darkness. The text marks the journey step by step. After 1 double-hour darkness. After 2, darkness. After 3, darkness. No dawn. No torchlight. No opening in the stone. Just darkness. It is one of the strangest passages in the entire epic. Gilgamesh is walking beneath the mountain that joins heaven, earth, and the underworld. He has left the human world behind, but he has not entered the world of the gods. He is between realms, and symbolically he is moving in the opposite direction from everything Uruk represents. Uruk is walls, order, temples, cultivated fields, human law. It is the achievement of civilization. Gilgamesh had once ruled it from above, confident that strength and greatness could make him larger than ordinary people. Now he moves blindly underground, wrapped in animal skins, unable to see the next step. The king is becoming a seeker. The man who once demanded glory now begs for knowledge. And the darkness forces the question he has been trying to outrun. What exactly does he expect to find at the end of this road? A secret, a ritual, a divine loophole, some hidden substance that can keep the body from becoming dust? Gilgamesh is not looking for comfort. He is not looking for someone to tell him Enkidu is in a better place. Mesopotamian visions of the underworld offered little of that consolation. He wants an exception. He wants the rule of death to apply to everyone else, but not to him. Then at last, the darkness begins to end. After the long passage beneath Mashu, Gilgamesh emerges into a place no ordinary traveller expects to find at the edge of the world. A radiant garden, where precious stones grow like fruit from branches. But before he can reach the immortal man he seeks, Gilgamesh will meet someone who asks a harder question than any monster ever asked him. Not how can you defeat death, but why are you running from life? At the edge of this impossible garden, Gilgamesh finds Siduri. She is a tavern keeper, though that word can sound too ordinary for where she lives. Siduri stands at the boundary of the world. Near the sea, Gilgamesh must cross to reach Utnapishtim. In some readings, she is connected with divine wisdom. In others, she is simply a woman who understands what desperate travellers look like. And Gilgamesh looks desperate. He is filthy from the wilderness. His hair is matted. He wears animal skins. The great king of Uruk has crossed the mountain of the sun and emerged looking less like a ruler than a man fleeing from some invisible predator. Siduri sees him approaching and is afraid. The poem says she closes her door, or at least prepares to. That detail matters. Gilgamesh has spent much of the epic forcing his way into forbidden places. He entered the Cedar Forest. He challenged Humbaba. He insulted gods. But here, at a tavern on the edge of the universe, someone sees him and thinks, "This man is dangerous." Gilgamesh calls out to her. He tells her who he is. And then again, he tells the story he cannot stop telling. Enkidu was his friend. Enkidu died. Gilgamesh saw his body decay. And now Gilgamesh is terrified that the same thing will happen to him. This is the question Siduri puts before him. Why do you run yourself into the ground searching for what no human can hold? Because from her perspective, Gilgamesh is doing something almost tragic in its simplicity. He has lost someone he loves, and instead of accepting grief, he has turned grief into a war against the structure of reality itself. He wants to find Utnapishtim. He wants the secret of life without end. He wants proof that death can be beaten. But Siduri's answer in the best-known version of this scene is not a secret route or sacred formula. It is a warning. When the gods created humanity, she tells him, they assigned death to humankind. Life without end they kept for themselves. That is a brutal idea. Not because it says people die. Gilgamesh already knows that. Enkidu's body taught him that lesson in the most terrible possible way. What makes it brutal is the implication that death is not an accident. It is not a punishment that can be reversed by enough strength, courage, or royal blood. It is part of the division between gods and mortals. The gods endure. Humans do not. So what can a mortal life mean? Siduri gives an answer that has echoed across thousands of years. Fill your belly, make merry day and night, wear clean clothes. Wash yourself. Delight in your child's hand. Let your wife rejoice in your embrace. At first, this can sound almost shallow. Eat good food. Put on nice clothes. Spend time with your family. Is that really the answer to death? But Siduri is not telling Gilgamesh to distract himself. She is telling him that ordinary life is not ordinary at all. Food shared at a table, a clean garment after labour, a child holding your hand, a spouse laughing beside you. These things are fragile precisely because they end. They are meaningful because they cannot be possessed forever. Gilgamesh has been chasing the kind of immortality that would place him beyond all limits. Siduri points him back toward the limits that make human love, human pleasure, and human community possible. And there is something almost painful about the timing. Gilgamesh had all of this in Uruk. He had a city, he had power, he had servants and feasts, and a name known across the land. But he did not understand what any of it was worth until Enkidu died. Now he stands at the end of the world, hearing someone describe the life he abandoned. But there is an important complication here. The famous speech about food, clothing, family and joy does not appear in exactly the same form in every surviving version of the Gilgamesh story. The epic was copied and reshaped across many centuries. We have old Babylonian fragments, probably from the early 2nd millennium BCE, and the later Standard Babylonian version, the more complete form most modern readers know. In the older version, Siduri appears to give Gilgamesh the direct advice to enjoy the daily gifts of mortal life. In the later Standard Babylonian tablets, much of that famous speech is absent. Siduri still questions Gilgamesh. She still hears his grief. But rather than simply telling him to return home and accept death, she gives him practical directions. She tells him how he may find Urshanabi, the boatman who can take him across the deadly waters toward Utnapishtim. So did Siduri tell Gilgamesh to enjoy life, or did she help him continue his impossible quest? The answer may be both, depending on which ancient tablet we are reading, and that uncertainty is not a flaw in the story. It reveals something fascinating. Gilgamesh was not frozen in one final perfect text. It lived through scribes, schools, damaged tablets, lost lines and changing audiences. Different generations may have heard Siduri differently, as the voice of acceptance, as the voice of practical guidance, or as both at once, because Siduri understands something Gilgamesh does not yet understand. You can tell a grieving person that death is unavoidable. You can remind him that life contains joys worth returning to. But you cannot force him to accept it before he is ready. Gilgamesh listens. And then he refuses. He does not turn around. He does not go back to Uruk. He does not sit down to eat, bathe, change his clothes, and hold the hands of the people still alive. Not yet. He wants to Utnapishtim. He wants the one human being who crossed the boundary. Siduri says, cannot be crossed. And before we follow him to the waters of death, a quick reminder, if you enjoy ancient mysteries like this, the channel's book on 12 unexplained mysteries is available through the website, with the link in the description. Siduri points Gilgamesh onward, toward a man named Urshanabi. But the next obstacle is not a mountain, a god, or a monster. It is a sea no mortal is supposed to cross. Urshanabi is not a god. He is not a monster guarding a gate. He is a boatman. But he serves the one man who is said to have escaped death. That makes him one of the most important figures Gilgamesh has ever met. Siduri tells Gilgamesh to find him at the shore. Beyond that shore lies a place no ordinary traveller reaches, across a vast and terrible barrier called the Waters of Death. On the far side lives Utnapishtim, the ancient survivor of the Great Flood, the man whom the gods granted life without end. Gilgamesh has crossed mountains no human should cross. He has passed through the tunnel beneath the path of the sun. He has wandered until he reached the edge of the world. But this is different. A mountain can be climbed. A monster can be fought. A wilderness can be endured. The waters of death cannot be touched. The epic does not pause to give us a neat scientific explanation. These are mythic waters, part of the strange geography at the boundary between the mortal world and the place where Utnapishtim lives. In some interpretations, they may carry associations with the underworld, with impurity, or with the deadly separation between ordinary humans and the divine realm. Whatever their exact meaning, the rule is absolute. No living person can touch them, not with a hand, not with an oar, not even with the pole used to push a boat forward. One mistake, and the journey ends. And when Gilgamesh finally finds Urshanabi, he does not exactly introduce himself politely. This is Gilgamesh, after all. He has been travelling in grief and fear for so long that every obstacle now looks like an enemy. In the standard Babylonian version of the epic, he arrives and sees mysterious objects associated with the boatmen. The text calls them the Stone Ones, or Stone Beings. What exactly were they? Nobody knows for certain. They may have been magical helpers. They may have been carved stone objects used in a ritual. Some scholars have suggested they were part of the boat itself, perhaps devices that helped Urshanabi cross the dangerous waters without touching them. The surviving lines are old, damaged, and frustratingly unclear. But Gilgamesh sees them and destroys them. He smashes the very things that may have made the crossing possible. It is one of those moments where grief turns into self-sabotage. Gilgamesh has come all this way, seeking wisdom from the immortal man. Yet before he even reaches the boat, he attacks something he does not understand. Urshanabi sees the destruction and asks the obvious question. Who are you? Why have you ruined what was needed for this journey? And Gilgamesh gives the answer that has become almost a ritual by now. I am Gilgamesh, king of Uruk. Enkidu was my friend. Enkidu died, and I am afraid there is something remarkable about this scene. Gilgamesh is still a king. He still has the name, the strength, the reputation, but none of it helps him here. Urshanabi does not care that he ruled a great city. The waters of death do not care that he killed Humbaba or defeated the bull of heaven. At the end of the world, kingship means nothing. Only the journey matters. And because Gilgamesh has destroyed the Stone Ones, Urshanabi gives him labour instead. He tells him to go into the forest and cut 120 long poles. Not one magical staff. Not one divine weapon. 120 ordinary poles, each meant to be used once. The instructions are precise. Gilgamesh will stand in the boat and push with a pole. But after each pole touches the water, he must throw it away. He cannot use it again. He cannot let his hand touch the waters. He cannot allow the contamination of death to travel back into the boat. So Gilgamesh goes to work. This is not the heroic labour of the Cedar Forest. There is no monstrous guardian to defeat, no glory, no victory feast waiting afterward. He cuts the poles. He carries them. He returns to the shore, and then the two men set out. Imagine what this crossing means for Gilgamesh. Every push moves him closer to the one person who may know the secret he needs. But every push also uses up one more pole. The boat moves forward because Gilgamesh is literally exhausting the tools that protect him. One pole, then another, then another. A journey across death powered by human effort, but only temporarily. Every action buys a little more distance. Every action also brings the end closer. Eventually, the poles are gone. In the poem, Gilgamesh and Urshanabi must improvise. Gilgamesh removes his garment, and it is used to help move the boat through the final stretch, apparently as a sail or a substitute for the lost equipment. The details vary in translation, but the image is clear enough. The king who once wore royal splendour reaches the final boundary, stripped down to what he has left. No army, no friend, no weapons that matter, just a boatman, a piece of cloth, and the desperate hope that somewhere beyond this deadly water, death has already been defeated. Then the far shore appears, and there, waiting in a place beyond the ordinary human world, is Utnapishtim. Not a god, not born immortal, a man. The only man Gilgamesh believes has found the answer he has been chasing since Enkidu's body went still. Utnapishtim looks at Gilgamesh and sees something familiar. Not the king of Uruk, not the slayer of Humbaba, not the man who brought down the bull of heaven. He sees a human being wearing himself away with fear. The poem describes Gilgamesh as exhausted, filthy, wrapped in animal skins, his face altered by grief. He has travelled farther than any ordinary man should be able to travel, but the journey has not made him wiser yet. It has only made his terror more visible, and Utnapishtim asks him a question that cuts straight through all of it. Why have you worn yourself out? Why have you filled your heart with sorrow? Why have you abandoned the life you had? Gilgamesh does not give a philosophical answer. He gives the answer of someone who has watched death arrive and cannot forget what he saw. Enkidu was my friend. Enkidu died. His body became dust. And if Enkidu could die, then so can I. This is why Utnapishtim matters more than anyone else in the epic. Gilgamesh is not looking for a god who might take pity on him. He is not searching for a priest, a magician, or a healer with some hidden remedy. He has come to find a man who, according to the story, did not die. Utnapishtim lives beyond the waters of death, separated from ordinary human society, in a place that feels less like a distant island and more like the edge of reality itself. He has a wife. He has a home. He can speak with Gilgamesh. He remembers his former life. He was once a mortal man, living in a mortal city. But now he belongs somewhere else. That is the detail that makes him both hopeful and terrifying. Hopeful, because Gilgamesh can point to him and say, "There." There is proof that death is not completely unbeatable. Terrifying, because Utnapishtim is alone. There is no immortal kingdom beyond the sea. No ancient age when every human being lived forever and then somehow lost it. The Epic of Gilgamesh does not present Utnapishtim as the last survivor of an immortal human race. He is the exception. One man, one wife, one extraordinary event. And that distinction matters, because people sometimes hear that Mesopotamian stories contain a flood survivor granted eternal life and jump immediately to a much bigger conclusion. Maybe humanity was originally immortal. Maybe this is an older version of Eden. Maybe the epic preserves a memory of death entering the world later. But that is not what this scene says. Gilgamesh does not arrive expecting to reclaim an inheritance that all humans once possessed. He arrives because Utnapishtim did something no other human has done. Or more precisely, because something happened to Utnapishtim that no other human has experienced. Gilgamesh is staring at an impossible case. And impossible cases are dangerous. They can create hope where there may be none. So he asks the question that has driven every step of his journey. How did you escape the fate that takes everyone else? How did you stand in the assembly of the gods? How did you find life without end? It is a simple question, but behind it is the entire human problem. If death has one loophole, can it be opened again? If one mortal crossed the line into immortality, is there a path for another mortal to follow? Gilgamesh wants instructions. He wants a test of strength, a secret ritual, a dangerous monster to kill, a distant place to reach. That is how heroes solve problems. Find the obstacle. Fight it. Endure it. Win. But Utnapishtim's story is not going to give him that. Because Utnapishtim did not become immortal by being stronger than death. He did not defeat a god in battle. He did not discover a medicine. He did not earn eternal life as a reward for a lifetime of perfect behaviour. He survived something almost no one else survived. Long before Gilgamesh was born, before Uruk became the city he ruled, the gods made a decision. Human beings had become too numerous, too loud, too disruptive, at least in the logic of the Mesopotamian myth. Their noise disturbed the divine world, and the gods resolved to wipe them out. Not punish one city, not strike down one wicked king. End humanity with a flood. This is where Utnapishtim's story begins. His name itself changes across the long Mesopotamian tradition. In older versions of the flood story, the survivor is often called Atrahasis, meaning something like exceedingly wise. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, he is Utnapishtim, a name often understood to mean he found life. Different tablets, different periods, different retellings. But the core pattern remains recognizable. The gods decide on destruction. One god does not fully accept it, and one human is given a warning. In the Gilgamesh version, that god is Ea, known in Sumerian as Enki. Ea is a god of wisdom, fresh water, craft, and cunning solutions. But he has a problem. The divine assembly has sworn an oath. The plan is supposed to remain secret. So Ea does not simply walk up to Utnapishtim and say, "The gods are going to drown the world." Instead, he speaks through a wall. "Reed house, he calls. Wall, wall. It is one of the strangest and most memorable moments in ancient literature. A god obeying the letter of an oath while undermining its purpose. He does not directly reveal the secret to the man. He tells the wall. Utnapishtim, listening inside, understands exactly what he means. Tear down your house. Build a boat. Abandon your possessions. Save life. And suddenly, Gilgamesh's question has an answer, though not the answer he wanted. Utnapishtim did not find immortality by escaping the ordinary limits of human nature. He found it because the world ended around him, and he was chosen to live through it. The story Gilgamesh is about to hear is not a recipe for becoming deathless. It is the story of a flood so immense that even the gods would fear what they had done. Utnapishtim obeys, and the instructions are enormous. This is not a little raft tied together in desperation. Ea tells him to build a vessel capable of surviving the destruction of the entire world. In the standard Babylonian version of the epic, the boat is described almost like a floating fortress. Its length and width are equal. It rises in multiple decks. It is sealed with bitumen, the black natural tar that Mesopotamian builders used to waterproof boats and buildings. The dimensions are strange to modern readers. The vessel is almost a cube. That may be the point. This is not a ship designed to sail gracefully through open water. It is a survival chamber, a sealed box built to endure chaos. Utnapishtim gathers what he can, his family, his possessions. Skilled workers, seeds and living things. The text speaks of the seed of all living creatures, language that sounds very familiar to anyone who knows the biblical story of Noah. But the Mesopotamian version has its own texture. Utnapishtim loads gold and silver. He brings craftsmen who helped build the vessel. He brings animals, wild and domestic. This is a world about to be erased, and the boat becomes a tiny compressed version of that world. A household, a workshop, a storehouse, a zoo, a future civilization waiting inside a shell of wood and tar. Then comes the appointed day. The god Shamash sends a warning sign. When the skies begin to behave in a certain way, Utnapishtim is to enter the boat and seal the door behind him. And once that door closes, the flood begins. The Epic of Gilgamesh does not describe a calm rain falling for 40 days and 40 nights. Its flood is more violent than that, more immediate. The storm does not just cover the land, it attacks creation itself. Black clouds gather over the horizon, thunder rolls. The storm gods rise, Adad, the god of thunder, roars from the sky. Lightning flashes, winds scream across the land, darkness swallows daylight. For 6 days and 7 nights, the storm tears through the world. The language is brutal, the flood turns people into clay. The land is flattened, nothing can be seen but water. And then the epic gives us one of its most haunting reversals. The gods themselves are terrified. These are the beings who voted to destroy humanity. These are the divine powers who sent the storm. But when they see the scale of what they have unleashed, they flee upward like frightened dogs. They crouch around the heavens, they weep. The goddess Ishtar, who earlier in the epic could rage with devastating force, now mourns the destruction. She regrets the decision. She compares the dead human beings to fish filling the sea. It is a very different image of divinity from the one many people expect in a flood story. The gods are powerful, but they are divided. They are impulsive. They make decisions, regret them, argue about them, and suffer the consequences of their own choices. In some Mesopotamian flood traditions, the gods also face a practical problem. Without humans there are no offerings, no bread placed before the temples, no beer poured out in ritual. The gods had wanted silence. Now they have emptiness. After the 7th day, the storm finally breaks. The sea becomes still. Utnapishtim opens the boat and looks out at a world that no longer looks like a world. Everywhere he sees water, everywhere he sees silence. Then in the distance, land. The boat comes to rest on Mount Nimush, usually identified by scholars with a mountain somewhere in the ancient Near East, though the exact location remains uncertain. For 6 days, the vessel stays there, held fast. On the 7th day, Utnapishtim begins testing the world outside. He releases a dove. The dove flies out, finds no resting place, and returns. Then he releases a swallow. The swallow also returns. Finally, he releases a raven. The raven flies away, sees that the waters are receding, finds food, and does not come back. That is the signal. The earth is becoming habitable again. Utnapishtim opens the vessel. The survivors emerge. He offers a sacrifice on the mountaintop, arranging offerings for the gods. And the gods gather around the smoke like flies, one of those ancient lines that is almost shocking in its bluntness. The same gods who had stood apart from humanity now crowd around the first offering from the remade world. And then the argument begins. Enlil, the god who had driven the flood decision, is furious when he discovers that human life survived. The plan had been extermination. Ea had found a loophole. Ea answers him with the same sharp logic he used to save Utnapishtim in the first place. Why destroy everyone? Why use a flood to punish humanity as a whole? If people must be corrected, there are other ways. Send famine, send disease, send predators. Let punishment be limited rather than total. It is not exactly a modern moral lesson. These myths are not arguing for universal human rights. But there is a real criticism here of disproportionate destruction. Ea is saying that wiping out all life was excessive, and this is where the flood story moves from survival to immortality. But before we get there, it is worth stopping over the obvious question. Is this Noah? The similarities between the Mesopotamian flood story and Genesis are impossible to miss. A divine decision to send a flood, a chosen man warned in advance, a huge vessel, the preservation of family and animals, birds released to test whether the waters have fallen, a landing on a mountain, a sacrifice offered after survival. These parallels are why scholars have studied the stories together for more than a century. The Mesopotamian flood traditions are older than the surviving biblical text in their written form. Versions involving Atrahasis and Utnapishtim circulated in Mesopotamia long before the Book of Genesis reached its final shape. Ancient Israel also existed in a world deeply connected to Mesopotamia through trade, migration, empire, war, and exile. Cultural contact was real. Stories travelled, but direct borrowing is harder to prove than a list of similarities might suggest. The Genesis flood story is not simply Gilgamesh with different names. Its theology is dramatically different. In Genesis 1, God sends the flood as a judgment on human violence and corruption. In Gilgamesh and Atrahasis, the problem is often human noise, overpopulation, or disruption to the gods. Genesis presents a sovereign god who controls the event. The Mesopotamian gods panic in the middle of their own disaster. Even the boats differ. Noah's Ark is a long rectangular vessel with specific proportions. Utnapishtim's boat is closer to a giant cube, and after the flood, Genesis centers on a covenant. God promises never again to destroy all life with a flood. The Mesopotamian tradition moves instead toward divine compromise, population controls, and the strange elevation of one survivor beyond ordinary humanity. So the best way to understand the parallels is not to flatten them into one story. They may reflect shared ancient Near Eastern flood traditions. They may show adaptation, conversation, and reinterpretation across cultures. They may preserve memories of real regional disasters transformed over centuries into cosmic myth. What we can say with confidence is that long before Noah's Ark became one of the most recognized stories on Earth, Mesopotamian scribes were already writing about a man who built a vessel against a world-ending flood. And that man, Utnapishtim, survived. But survival was only the beginning. Because after the waters receded, after the birds found land, after the gods smelled the sacrifice and realized humanity was not gone, Utnapishtim received something no flood survivor was supposed to receive. Not merely another life. Life without end. Enlil stands before the man he had tried to destroy. This matters. Enlil is not simply another god arriving late to the feast. In the flood story, he is the force behind the disaster. He had demanded that humanity be swept away. When he first sees Utnapishtim alive, his reaction is anger. Someone has escaped the sentence. The plan failed. But Ea confronts him, not with an apology, with an argument. Why punish everyone for the wrongdoing of some? Why unleash a flood that destroys the guilty, the innocent, the animals, the fields, the whole living world? If humanity has become a problem, Ea says, then deal with humanity in smaller, more measured ways. The gods have just watched their own decision turn into catastrophe. They have seen the world emptied. They have felt the absence of offerings. And now, on the mountain, the smoke from Utnapishtim's sacrifice rises into the air. The gods gather around it. It is a strange moment. Utnapishtim has survived because one god secretly warned him. Now he gives thanks to all the gods, including the god who wanted him dead. And Enlil, faced with this survivor, makes a decision no one could have expected. He does not kill Utnapishtim. He transforms him. In the standard Babylonian Epic of Gilgamesh, Enlil takes Utnapishtim and his wife and grants them a new kind of existence. The language is brief but enormous in its implications. Until this moment, Utnapishtim has been human, a king, a householder, a man with a city, a family, and a name. Now Enlil declares that Utnapishtim and his wife will become like us, the gods. Not gods in the sense that they suddenly rule storms or command the sun. The epic does not give them temples, cults, or divine powers. What it gives them is escape from the one law that governs every other human being. They will not die. That is why Gilgamesh has crossed deserts, mountains, and the waters of death to find this man. Utnapishtim is not a metaphor. He is the living exception. The proof that death somehow has been broken. But the reason it was broken is exactly what makes Gilgamesh's hopes so fragile. Utnapishtim was not granted immortality because humans were once naturally immortal. He was not receiving back a birthright stolen from all mankind. The epic never says that every human being once lived forever and then lost that privilege through some ancient mistake. This is not Eden. There is no garden where death enters the human story because the first couple breaks a command. There is no universal fall from immortality into mortality. In Gilgamesh, humans are mortal from the beginning of the story. Gilgamesh himself is 2/3 divine, stronger and greater than ordinary men, and even he knows that death waits for him. Utnapishtim becomes immortal, because he lived through a singular crisis in cosmic history. The gods decided to erase humanity. Ea defied that decision. Utnapishtim obeyed instructions that no other human was given. He built the impossible vessel. He preserved life through the destruction of the world. Then, when the waters withdrew, he restored the bond between gods and humans through sacrifice. His immortality is not normal. It is not a promise. It is not even clearly a reward earned by moral perfection. Utnapishtim himself did not choose to be the hero of the flood. He was chosen because Ea favoured him, or because Ea needed a human being to preserve what Enlil had nearly erased. And after the flood, Enlil's gift may be read as something more than generosity. It is a settlement. The gods have made a disaster so vast that it threatens the structure of the world itself. Humanity is nearly gone. The divine order has been shaken. Making Utnapishtim immortal may be Enlil's way of marking the event as finished, sealing a new arrangement between gods and humans. The survivor is elevated beyond humanity precisely because he can no longer return to ordinary human life. That is why Utnapishtim does not go back to Shurpak. He does not return to rebuild his old house. He does not become the immortal king of a restored city. Instead, he and his wife are sent far away to the mouth of the rivers at the edge of the world. For Mesopotamians, that location was not merely remote. It was the boundary of the known world where the great rivers met the distant sea, where geography blurred into myth. It was a place beyond ordinary travel, beyond the cities, fields, temples and graves that defined human existence. Utnapishtim lives forever, but he lives apart. Think about the price hidden inside that reward. Every person he knew from before the flood is gone, except those preserved with him, and even they would eventually die, unless the story says otherwise. Every generation after him rises and disappears. Cities are built, conquered, forgotten. Kings boast age and return to dust. He remains. Immortality in Gilgamesh is not presented as an open door to a glorious new human future. It is an exile from the human condition. Utnapishtim has crossed the boundary between mortal and divine, but he has done so by being removed from the world of mortals. And that is the cruel logic Gilgamesh has not fully faced yet. Yes, Utnapishtim proves that a human being can escape death. But he proves it happened once after the gods nearly destroyed the entire world. Once through secret divine intervention. Once for a man and his wife who became the permanent survivors of an event that would never happen again. Gilgamesh sees the possibility. Utnapishtim sees the impossibility. And before he tells the king what happened to the last chance at renewed youth, Utnapishtim asks a devastating question. If Gilgamesh cannot master something as small as sleep, how can he expect to master death? So Utnapishtim gives Gilgamesh a test, not a battle. Not another journey through darkness. Not a monster to defeat, a mountain to climb, or a god to challenge. Just this. Stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights. That is all. At first it almost sounds insulting. Gilgamesh has killed Humbaba in the Cedar Forest. He has faced the bull of heaven. He has watched his closest friend die in agony. He has crossed the wilderness wearing animal skins. He has passed through the tunnel of the sun. He has crossed the waters of death, a place no ordinary human being can survive. And now this ancient survivor, this man who lives beyond the reach of death, asks him to do something every exhausted traveller has done without meaning to. Do not fall asleep. But that is exactly the point. Gilgamesh has come looking for the greatest possible victory. He wants to defeat death itself. He wants the secret that will keep him from joining Enkidu in the dust. Yet Utnapishtim begins with the smallest version of the same problem. Sleep. Every night. Human beings surrender to it. Kings surrender to it. Warriors surrender to it. The strong, the clever, the wealthy, the terrified. No matter what they command during the day, eventually their bodies make the decision for them. You can fight an enemy, you can run from danger, you can build walls around a city. But when sleep comes, there is no sword you can raise against it. Gilgamesh sits down, and almost immediately he fails. The epic is brutal here because it does not allow him even the dignity of a long struggle. He does not endure 5 days and collapse near the end. He does not stare into the darkness, clenching his jaw, battling exhaustion hour after hour. Sleep takes him at once. In some translations, Utnapishtim says that sleep blows over him like a mist. It is a beautiful image, but also a humiliating one. Gilgamesh, the great king of Uruk, the man whose name reaches the edge of the world, is overcome by something light enough to be compared with fog, and he lies there. While Gilgamesh sleeps, Utnapishtim's wife feels pity for him. She sees not a conqueror now, not a figure of superhuman strength, but a worn-out man who has reached the end of everything he thought strength could accomplish. She asks her husband to wake him, to let him return home. But Utnapishtim has no intention of letting Gilgamesh escape the lesson that easily. Instead, he tells his wife to bake a loaf of bread each day and place it beside the sleeping king. She is also told to mark the passing days on the wall. It is such an ordinary piece of evidence, no divine thunderbolt, no cosmic decree written in the sky, just bread, one loaf fresh from the oven, one beginning to cool, one drying out, one hardening, one turning stale, one beginning to mould. Day after day, the bread changes beside Gilgamesh's head while he remains unconscious. Time, which he has crossed the world trying to defeat, passes silently in the form of food becoming inedible. Then, after the days have passed, Utnapishtim wakes him. Gilgamesh opens his eyes and says something painfully human. He insists that he has barely slept, maybe only a moment. Maybe sleep merely brushed against him as he sat there. But Utnapishtim points to the loaves. Look at them. The first is fresh, the next is old. Another is hard. Another is spoiled. The evidence is sitting beside him, arranged in a row. Gilgamesh cannot argue with it. 7 days have vanished from his life, and he did not experience any of them. This is more than a trick designed to embarrass him. Sleep is the epic's small daily image of death. When Gilgamesh sleeps, the world continues without him. The sun rises and disappears. Bread is baked, dries and decays. Other people speak, work, wait and grow older. But for the sleeper, time is gone. There is a break in consciousness, a blank space. One moment he closes his eyes. The next days have passed. That is what makes death so terrifying to Gilgamesh. Not only pain, not only the destruction of the body, it is the loss of presence, the fact that the world will continue while he cannot see it, command it, walk through it, or make his name heard inside it. Enkidu has gone into that silence. Gilgamesh is trying to stop himself from following. But Utnapishtim forces him to face the irony at the centre of his quest. He wants eternal life, yet he cannot conquer one ordinary night. He wants to escape the final sleep, yet he cannot resist the temporary one. He has treated mortality as though it were an enemy outside himself, some obstacle he can overcome by courage and effort. But mortality is inside him. It is in his hunger, his exhaustion, his aging body, his need to sleep. Gilgamesh is 2/3 divine, according to the Epic. But the 1/3 that is human is not a minor flaw buried somewhere beneath his greatness. It governs him, it pulls him down. It reminds him that no amount of fame, strength, or royal power can make him independent of the conditions of being alive. This is where the heroic confidence begins to break. Earlier, Gilgamesh could believe that every limit existed to be challenged. If a forest is forbidden, enter it. If a monster guards it, kill it. If a goddess is offended, survive her revenge. If death takes your friend, walk to the end of the world and demand answers from the immortal man. That confidence made him extraordinary, but it also made him blind. The sleep test does not turn Gilgamesh into a different person in a single moment. He is not suddenly peaceful, he does not smile and accept death. He still wants what Utnapishtim has. He still aches for some way out. But now he has been shown something he cannot deny. He is vulnerable in ways no weapon can solve, and that realization is the beginning of humility. Not weakness, humility, the knowledge that being powerful does not mean being limitless, the knowledge that a king can command a city but not command his own body to remain awake, the knowledge that death may not be a puzzle waiting for the right hero to solve. For Gilgamesh, it is a devastating defeat, but Utnapishtim has not finished with him yet, because if immortality is beyond Gilgamesh's reach, there may still be something else. Not life without end, but a chance to become young again. But Utnapishtim has one last thing to tell him. Not the secret of eternal life. Something smaller. And because it is smaller, perhaps it feels possible. There is a plant growing in the deep waters. Utnapishtim says, its thorns are sharp like those of a rose. If a human being can reach it and eat it, the plant has the power to restore youth. An old man can become young again. Notice what this is not. It is not immortality. It does not make Gilgamesh equal to the gods. It does not guarantee that he will never die. It offers no escape from the final boundary that terrified him enough to cross the world. But it offers time, more years, a restored body, the possibility of beginning again. And after everything Gilgamesh has endured, even that sounds like a miracle. The plant lies at the bottom of the Apsu, the deep freshwater realm beneath the earth. To reach it, Gilgamesh does not simply dive down. He ties heavy stones to his feet, weights that drag him into the darkness. It is another descent, another journey toward the place humans are not meant to go. He reaches the bottom. He finds the plant, and its thorns cut his hands as he takes it. Even now, the gift of renewed life is not gentle. Gilgamesh has to bleed for it. Then he cuts the stones free and rises back toward the surface, carrying the thing he has searched for since Enkidu died. For a moment it seems he has won, not everything. not immortality, but something real. And what Gilgamesh does next matters. He does not immediately eat the plant himself. Instead, he says he will take it back to Uruk. He will test it on an old man there. If it truly restores youth, then Gilgamesh will use it himself. There is caution in this decision, but maybe something else too. The king who once ruled for his own appetite is thinking about his city again. He is imagining Uruk, its people, its elders, a future that includes someone besides himself. But the epic does not let him bring that future home. On the way back, Gilgamesh stops beside a pool to bathe. He sets the plant down, and then a serpent appears. Drawn by the plant's fragrance, it takes the plant and slips away. As it leaves, the serpent sheds its skin, a natural image of renewal. The snake receives the transformation Gilgamesh wanted. The human being is left with nothing. Gilgamesh sees what has happened and breaks down. All that distance, all that suffering, the tunnel, the waters of death, the humiliation of sleep, the descent into the deep. He had held the answer in his hands, and then, for one ordinary moment, he lost it. This is why the serpent scene often gets compared with Eden. In Genesis 2, a serpent stands near a story about human mortality, forbidden knowledge, and a lost chance at life. But the stories are not the same. Gilgamesh does not eat forbidden fruit. No serpent persuades him to disobey a god. And the plant is not the biblical tree of life. The surviving Epic of Gilgamesh is its own Mesopotamian story, with its own meaning. Still, the resemblance is worth noticing. In both traditions, humans stand close to something that could change their condition forever. And in both, that possibility slips away. For Gilgamesh, the loss is final. The plant is gone, the serpent disappears, and death is still waiting. So did the Epic of Gilgamesh preserve a memory of a time before Eden, when all human beings were immortal. The short answer is no. It preserves something more complicated, and in some ways more haunting. Gilgamesh is absolutely obsessed with the fact that humans die. The death of Enkidu does not introduce mortality into the world. It reveals mortality to Gilgamesh personally. Before Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh knows death exists in the abstract. Kings die, warriors die, old people die, but he has never allowed that knowledge to reach him. Then Enkidu's body lies still, and suddenly Gilgamesh understands that he too is made of flesh. He too will become dust. That is the engine of the entire journey. The epic does not say that humans were once immortal and then lost immortality through a single ancient mistake. It usually presents death as part of the basic arrangement between gods and humans. In one of the most important speeches connected with Gilgamesh's search, the message is blunt. When the gods created humanity, they assigned death to human beings. Life without end they kept for themselves. That is not Eden. It is not a story in which humans begin in paradise, living forever, and then fall from a higher condition. It is a story in which the line between gods and humans exists from the beginning. The gods are immortal, humans are not, and Gilgamesh, despite being two-thirds divine in the epic's own language, cannot cross that line. That detail matters. If anyone should have a chance, it is him. He is a king, a giant, a conqueror, the son of a goddess. He has defeated Humbaba in the Cedar Forest. He has killed the bull of heaven. He has travelled farther than any ordinary person could survive. But none of it changes the one fact that terrifies him. He is still human enough to die. So what about Utnapishtim? Here is where modern retellings can create confusion. Utnapishtim is immortal. He survived the flood. The gods granted him and his wife life without end. doesn't that prove that immortality was once available to humanity? Not exactly. Utnapishtim is not presented as the representative of a lost human race. He is an exception so extreme that the epic spends an entire section explaining why he is different. He survives a disaster meant to destroy humanity. He obeys Ea's warning. He builds the great boat. He preserves life through the flood. And after the waters fall, the gods make a decision that is never offered to everyone else. Utnapishtim and his wife are transformed. They are placed far away at the edge of the world beyond the waters of death. They become almost godlike, but almost is important. Utnapishtim does not return to Uruk and teach humanity how to live forever. He does not establish an immortal dynasty. He is removed from ordinary human life, precisely because his condition is extraordinary. In the logic of the epic, he is not evidence that death used to be absent. He is evidence that immortality is so rare that it requires divine intervention after a cosmic catastrophe, and even Gilgamesh cannot inherit it. Utnapishtim makes that painfully clear. If Gilgamesh wants eternal life, he must first defeat sleep for 6 days and 7 nights. Gilgamesh fails almost immediately. The test is devastating because sleep is a small daily image of death. If he cannot stay awake for 1 week, how can he expect to overcome death forever? Then comes the plant, and this is where the claim can become even more misleading. The plant does offer something miraculous. It can restore youth. It can make an old person young again. But the epic never says that this plant was once the normal food of humanity. It does not say all people ate it in an original garden. It does not say the serpent stole humanity's ancient immortality. Gilgamesh discovers it only after Utnapishtim reveals its location. He has to descend into the deep waters to retrieve it. Its very existence is hidden, dangerous, and difficult to reach. This is not an ordinary human possession that was lost in the distant past. It is a rare opportunity, briefly placed within reach of one desperate man. And even then it is rejuvenation, not eternal life. Gilgamesh could have regained his youth. Perhaps he could have delayed death. But the text gives no reason to think he would have become deathless. The serpent's theft is tragic because Gilgamesh loses a possible renewal. He loses time. He loses the chance to return stronger, younger, perhaps hopeful. He does not lose a proven birthright of immortality shared by all humanity. That distinction may sound technical, but it changes the whole meaning of the story. The Epic of Gilgamesh is not really asking, why did humans fall from immortality? It is asking something more painful. How can a human being live knowing that immortality was never ours to begin with? And this is where headlines often flatten ancient traditions into something they are not. A headline may say Gilgamesh predates Eden, or that it contains the original story of the biblical serpent, flood, or lost eternal life. There are real similarities worth discussing. Mesopotamian literature is older than the Bible in written form. Biblical authors lived in a world shaped by Mesopotamian cultures. Flood stories, divine gardens, serpents, forbidden boundaries, and the search for life all appear across the ancient Near East. But similarity is not identity. One story can resemble another without being its source. A shared image does not prove direct borrowing, and even when influence is possible, the later story can transform the meaning completely. Gilgamesh, Genesis, Adapa, Atrahasis, and other ancient texts all wrestle with the same impossible problem. Why do humans die while the gods do not? But they do not all give the same answer. And once we look beyond Gilgamesh, the picture becomes stranger still, because in another Mesopotamian story, a man may lose the food and water of life not to a serpent, not through a flood, but through a trick that turns on a single fatal decision. That man is Adapa, And his story is one of the strangest in all Mesopotamian literature, because unlike Gilgamesh, Adapa may come closer than almost anyone to receiving immortality. Not through strength, not through a journey to the end of the earth, not by diving beneath the waters of death. He loses it because he obeys instructions. Adapa was a wise man from Eridu, the ancient city of the god Ea, also called Enki. In the surviving story, Adapa is no ordinary fisherman or priest. Ea has given him extraordinary wisdom, but he has not given him eternal life. Then Adapa gets into trouble with the south wind. The wind overturns his boat, and Adapa responds with a curse so powerful that he breaks the south wind's wing. For days the wind cannot blow. The god Anu notices. He demands to know what happened, and Adapa is summoned to heaven to answer for what he has done. Before Adapa leaves, Ea gives him a warning. When you stand before Anu, Ea tells him, "Do not eat the food they offer you. Do not drink the water they offer you. It will be the food of death. It will be the water of death." So Adapa goes to heaven. He meets the gatekeepers, he appears before Anu, and then something unexpected happens. Anu is not simply angry, he is amazed by Adapa, perhaps even impressed, and he offers Adapa food and water. But according to the text, this is not food of death. It is the food of life, the water of life, the gift that could have changed everything. And Adapa refuses. He does exactly what Ea told him to do. He will not eat, he will not drink, and after he has rejected the offer, the opportunity is gone. Adapa returns to Earth still mortal. It is an almost unbearable story. A human being stands before the gods. Immortality is placed within reach, and the very wisdom that protects him also prevents him from accepting it. But this is not simply the Mesopotamian version of Adam and Eve. The parallels are real enough to make us pause. There is divine food. There is a boundary between human beings and eternal life. There is a decisive act involving eating and drinking, and there is a human who ends up outside the condition of immortality. But the differences are just as important. In Genesis, Adam and Eve eat what God forbids. Their disobedience leads to exile from Eden, and they are blocked from eating from the tree of life. In Adapa, the hero refuses what is offered. He does not lose immortality because he rebels against his God. He loses it because he trusts his God too completely. Or perhaps because Ea has reasons of his own for keeping a human being from becoming deathless. The surviving tablets are damaged, and scholars still debate exactly how the story was meant to be understood. Was Ea protecting Adapa from a trap? Did Ea deceive him? Was Anu's offer sincere? Was this story connected to priestly ritual, sacred meals, or ancient ideas about wisdom and human limitation? We cannot answer every question with certainty, but the central tension is clear. Mesopotamian storytellers kept returning to the same terrifying possibility. What if death is not just something humans suffer? What if eternal life was once close enough to touch, but slipped away through a decision, a warning, a misunderstanding, or a divine plan we cannot see? Then there is Atrahasis. Atrahasis is especially important because it preserves one of the major Mesopotamian flood traditions, older in written form than the standard Babylonian version in Gilgamesh. And it gives us a wider picture of why human life, in Mesopotamian thought, could seem so fragile from the beginning. In this story, the gods create human beings because the lesser gods are exhausted. They have been digging canals, raising embankments, maintaining the land, doing the back-breaking labour that keeps the world functioning. Finally, they revolt. So the great gods create humanity to take over the work. That is a very different beginning from Eden. Humans are not made for a garden of abundance. They are made to labour, to feed the gods through offerings, to maintain the world that the gods rule. And then humanity multiplies. The population grows, human noise rises from the earth. The god Enlil cannot sleep. Again and again, he sends disaster to reduce the human numbers. Drought, famine, disease. But Ea helps humanity survive. Finally, Enlil decides on a flood meant to wipe them out completely. Ea warns Atrahasis, the human hero. Atrahasis builds a boat. He preserves life. The flood comes, and after the waters fall, the gods face a problem. They still need humans, but they cannot allow humanity to grow without limits again. So the story introduces controls on human life, infertility, infant death, women who do not bear children, and religious roles that stand outside ordinary family life. The surviving text is ancient, difficult, and not every detail is easy to reconstruct. But its larger message is hard to miss. Human mortality and suffering are not accidents in this world. They are part of the system that keeps the balance between gods and people. That does not mean every Mesopotamian believed one single explanation for death. Far from it, these traditions do not fit together like chapters in one book. Gilgamesh says one thing, Adapa gives us another possibility, Atrahasis gives us another, Genesis gives us another still. But they grew from neighbouring cultural worlds that traded goods, languages, myths, political ideas, and religious images for thousands of years. That is why the similarities matter. A flood survivor, a divine garden, a serpent, food of life, a human boundary that must not be crossed. Gods who are immortal while people are not. These were not random ideas appearing in isolation. They were part of a vast ancient conversation about life, death, divine justice, and the limits placed on human beings. But shared conversation does not mean one simple source. Genesis is not just Gilgamesh rewritten. Adapa is not Adam with a different name. Atrahasis is not Noah before Noah. Direct influence is possible in some cases. Broad inheritance from older Mesopotamian traditions is often plausible. But every text reshapes the inherited material around its own deepest questions. And that is what makes the comparison so revealing. In Gilgamesh, the tragedy is that immortality belongs to the gods, and one grieving king cannot seize it. In Adapa, immortality may be offered, but a human being cannot recognize it in time. In Atrahasis, mortality helps preserve cosmic order in a crowded and unstable world. And in Genesis, death becomes tied to disobedience, exile, and a garden closed behind human beings. Different stories, same ancient wound. Humans look up at the gods, or at heaven, or at the unreachable powers ruling the universe, and ask the question that never goes away. Why do they live forever, while we have only this brief and breakable life? Gilgamesh cannot answer that question, but by the end of his journey, he begins to understand what he can do with it. And that understanding brings him back to where the epic began. Uruk. After crossing mountains, wilderness, darkness, the waters of death and the distant edge of the world, Gilgamesh returns to the city he ruled before grief shattered him. He has not conquered death. He has not stolen the secret of eternal life. He has not brought Enkidu back. He returns empty-handed, or so it seems. The epic closes with Gilgamesh speaking to Urshanabi, the boatman who carried him across the deadly waters. He tells him to climb the walls of Uruk, to inspect their foundations, to look at their brickwork, to see the city laid out before them, its ramparts, its temples, its public spaces, the ordered human world built inside those massive walls. Go up, Urshanabi, he says in one common translation, walk on the wall of Uruk. Inspect its foundation terrace and examine its brickwork. And then comes the claim that these bricks were laid by the 7 sages, the ancient divine figures associated with the beginnings of civilization. It is a remarkable ending because Gilgamesh has spent the entire epic running away from one fact. He is mortal. Enkidu died, he will die too. No wall, no weapon, no heroic journey can change that. But now he points not toward heaven, not toward the gods, not toward the unreachable life of Utnapishtim. He points toward Uruk, toward what human beings can make. That does not mean the epic suddenly becomes cheerful. Gilgamesh has not discovered that death is good. He has not been told that grief was pointless. The loss of Enkidu is still the wound at the centre of everything. And the poem never lets us forget that even its greatest king will eventually disappear. Gilgamesh himself becomes part of the past, a name on tablets, a figure remembered in broken lines of ancient poetry. But perhaps that is exactly the point. He cannot possess immortality as a body that never ages, never weakens, never enters the grave. Yet he can leave something behind that outlasts one human life. A city, a tradition, a story. The labour of generations gathered into walls strong enough to make a king stop and look. Uruk was not imaginary. It was one of the great cities of ancient Mesopotamia, located in what is now southern Iraq. By the time the Gilgamesh stories were being written and recopied, Uruk already carried the weight of immense antiquity. Its ruins, temples, and monumental walls connected later Mesopotamians to a deep and nearly unreachable past. So when Gilgamesh praises Uruk, he is not merely bragging about his kingdom. The city becomes an answer to his terror, not a complete answer. Not a magical cure, but an answer humans can actually live with. You will not remain, but your work may. Your children may remember you. Your community may carry forward something you helped build. A wall may stand, a law may endure, a song may be repeated. A friend may be changed because you were here. The individual life ends, but human life continues, layer over layer, like the baked bricks in Uruk's foundations. This is why scholars and readers have debated the ending for so long. Is Gilgamesh accepting mortality? Is he resigned to a fate he cannot defeat? Has he gained wisdom, or is he still trying to console himself with monuments because the truth remains unbearable? The honest answer may be all of those at once. Gilgamesh does not become a serene philosopher who no longer fears death. The epic is too honest for that. He has seen death too closely. He has watched Enkidu's body become still. He has failed Utnapishtim's test. He has lost the plant that might have renewed him. He knows what waits. But he also knows something he did not know when he first fled Uruk in panic. A mortal life is not made meaningless by its ending. In fact, the ending may be what gives human choices their force. If time is limited, friendship matters. Courage matters. Building matters. Justice matters. Memory matters. The city matters because no single person can create it alone or keep it forever. It is a human achievement precisely because it passes from one generation to another. And then there is one final irony. Gilgamesh seeks a name that will never die. In the epic's opening, he is introduced as the king who saw the deep, who learned the hidden things, who travelled the long road. By the end, he has failed to become immortal, yet his name did survive. Not because he found eternal life, but because scribes wrote him down. For more than 3,000 years, people copied these stories onto clay tablets. Akkadian scribes preserved and reshaped older Sumerian tales. Kings and scholars encountered Gilgamesh in libraries. Then the tablets were buried, broken, forgotten, and eventually recovered from the earth. And now, thousands of years later, we are still asking the same question that drove him beyond the edges of the world. Why must humans die? That is why this epic endured. not because it offers a simple escape from death, but because it refuses to look away from the fear of it. Gilgamesh discovers that there may be no road back to a lost immortality. No hidden plant can permanently restore what humans do not possess. No heroic strength can force the gods to erase the boundary between mortal and divine. But the story leaves us with Uruk, with walls, with memory, with the fragile, stubborn human act of making something that may outlive us. And that brings us back to the question behind this entire journey. Did the oldest text before Eden say that humans were once immortal? The answer is no, not exactly. The Epic of Gilgamesh does not give us a clear doctrine that all human beings were once immortal and then lost that gift in a single ancient catastrophe. It does not describe an original human paradise where death had not yet entered the world. And it does not tell the story of a first man and woman expelled from a garden after breaking a divine command. What it gives us is stranger and in some ways more haunting. It gives us one immortal exception. Utnapishtim and his wife survive the flood, and the gods grant them a life set apart from ordinary humanity. They do not become the ancestors of an immortal race. Their gift is not passed down to Gilgamesh or to anyone else. They are placed far away beyond the ordinary human world, living at the edge of the earth like a reminder of something mortals can see but never reach. And then there is the plant. The plant can restore youth. It offers renewal, not necessarily endless life. Gilgamesh finds it. He holds it in his hands. For one brief moment, the impossible seems possible. Maybe death cannot be defeated, but perhaps aging can be delayed. Perhaps the body can be made young again. Then the serpent takes it. That is not the same thing as saying humanity used to be immortal. But it is absolutely a story about lost life, lost renewal, a gift that came within reach and slipped away. And that is why the comparison with Eden keeps returning. Mesopotamian stories and the biblical Eden narrative share a world of ancient symbols, gardens, divine boundaries, serpents, forbidden or inaccessible life, and the painful knowledge that human beings are not gods. These similarities are meaningful. They show that ancient people across the Near East were wrestling with related fears and hopes. But similar does not always mean identical, and it does not automatically prove that one story simply copied the other. The traditions developed across centuries and across cultures that were deeply connected, trading goods, fighting wars, sharing languages and borrowing ideas. Sometimes the links are clear, sometimes they are possible, sometimes they remain uncertain. What we can say is that both Mesopotamian writers and biblical authors asked a question that still has not gone away. Why are we mortal? Gilgamesh begins that question as a king who thinks strength can solve anything. He has power. He has divine blood. He has a city, an army, a name already larger than ordinary men. Then he meets Enkidu. Through friendship, he becomes more human. Through Enkidu's death, he discovers the terror of being human. Through his journey, he learns that no amount of courage can force the universe to give him what it has denied every other mortal. And through failure, through sleep, through the stolen plant, through the long road back to Uruk, he becomes something different from the arrogant king at the beginning. Not immortal, but awake. That may be the epic's real answer. Death is not defeated, grief is not erased, the people we love do not return because we want them badly enough. But the fact that life ends does not make it empty. It makes the time before the ending matter, the friend you stand beside, the work you do, the city you help build, the knowledge you preserve, the wrong you refuse to commit, the story you tell so someone else can carry it forward. Gilgamesh searched for eternal life at the ends of the earth. What he found was a harder kind of wisdom. You cannot control how long you live, but you can shape what your life becomes. And maybe that is why this story, pressed into clay thousands of years ago, still speaks to us now. If this journey through Gilgamesh made you see these ancient stories differently, please like the video, subscribe, and tell us in the comments. Where are you listening from? And what do you think Gilgamesh finally learned when he returned to Uruk? The best way to support the channel is to listen on Spotify through the link in the description. And stay with us, because these ancient stories are not finished speaking. They are still asking where we came from, why we die, and what we will build before we do.